Hey there! This video is a little bit unusual. I don't usually do introductions. I don't usually talk, honestly, I just read. But this one's going to be a little bit different, so I wanted to go ahead and give some kind of a preamble to explain exactly what is going on. It's Valentine's Day, and I know a lot of people this year are alone, in quarantine, just kind of cooped up with no one to have as a Valentine. So I thought it might be nice to sit down and read some love letters. I chose Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning for this particular video because, well, there are lots of different romantic writers that I would love to sort of insert myself into the marriage of, but I think they're probably the top of my list. So, we're just gonna be sitting down, chilling, having a drink, and reading some love letters. And if that's the kind of thing that you're interested in, then this is the video for you. If you're new here, typically on this channel I read public domain literature out loud. I've been working my way through Frankenstein, and it has been just a wonderful read. I had to take the last week off, but I've got a couple of videos shot and queued up ready for next week. So if that's the kind of thing that might interest you, feel free to follow me here. So without any more talking, because God knows that I'm not very good at that, let's go ahead and read some love letters. Happy Valentine's Day. I would say the chances of us finishing this are 0. Especially since here at the top it does say that there is a drawing of Elizabeth Barrett Browning on page 500. So that's not going to happen. Alright, let's go ahead and start some of the letters. Robert Browning to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. New Cross, Hatcham, Surrey. Postmarked January 10th, 1845. I love your verses with all my heart, dear Miss Barrett, and this is no offhand complimentary letter that I shall write. Whatever else, no prompt matter-of-course recognition of your genius, and there a graceful and natural end of the thing. Since the day last week when I first read your poems, I quite laugh to remember how I have been turning and turning again in my mind what I should be able to tell you of their effect upon me. For in the first flush of delight, I thought I would this once get out of my habit of purely passive enjoyment, when I do really enjoy, and thoroughly justify my admiration, perhaps even, as a loyal fellow craftsman should, try and find fault and do you some little good to be proud of hereafter. But nothing comes of it all. So into me has it gone, and part of me has it become, that this great living poetry of yours, not a flower of which but took root and grew, oh, how different that is from lying to be dried and pressed flat and prized highly and put in a book with a proper account at the top and bottom and shut up and put away, and the book to be called a flora besides. After all, I need not give up the thought of doing that too in time, because even now, talking with whoever is worthy, I can give a reason for my faith in one and another excellence, the fresh, strange music, the affluent language, the exquisite pathos, and true new brave thought. But in this, addressing myself to you, your own self, and for the first time, my feeling rises altogether. I do, as I say, love these books with all my heart, and I love you too. Do you know, I was once not very far from really seeing you. Mr. Kenyon said to me one morning, "Would you like to see Miss Barrett?" Then he went to announce me, then he returned. You were too unwell, and it is now years ago, and I feel, as at some untoward passage in my travels, as if I have been close, so close, to some world's wonder in chapel or crypt, only a screen to push, and I might have entered, but there was some slight, so it now seems slight, and just sufficient bar to admission, and the half-open door shut, and I went home my thousands of miles, and the sight was never to be. Well, these poems were to be, and this true thankful joy and pride with which I feel myself. Yours, ever faithfully, Robert Browning. Elizabeth Barrett Browning to Robert Browning, 50 Wimpole Street, January 11th, 1845. I thank you, dear Mr. Browning, from the bottom of my heart. You meant to give me pleasure by your letter, and even if the object had not been answered, I ought still to thank you. But it is thoroughly answered. Such a letter from such a hand! Sympathy is dear, very dear to me, but the sympathy of a poet, and of such a poet, is the quintessence of sympathy to me. Will you take back my gratitude for it, agreeing, too, that all of the commerce done in the world, from Tyre to Carthage, the exchange of sympathy for gratitude is the most princely thing. For the rest, you draw on me with your kindness. It is difficult to get rid of people when you have once given them too much pleasure. That is a fact, and we will not stop for the moral of it. What I was going to say, after a little natural hesitation, is that if you ever emerge without inconvenient effort from your passive state, and will tell me of such faults as rise to the surface and strike you as important in my poems, for of course I do not think of troubling you with criticism in detail, you will confer a lasting obligation on me, and one which I shall value so much that I covet it at a distance. I do not pretend to any extraordinary meekness under criticism, and it is possible enough that I might not be altogether obedient to yours. But, with my high respect for your power in your art, and for your experience as an artist, it would be quite impossible for me to hear a general observation of yours on what appeared to you my master faults, without being the better for it hereafter in some way. I ask for only a sentence or two of general observation, and I do not ask even for that, so as to tease you, but in the humble, low voice which is so excellent a thing in women, particularly when they go a-begging. The most frequent general criticism I receive is, I think, upon the style. If I would but change my style. But that is an objection, isn't it, to the writer bodily? Buffon says, and every sincere writer must feel, le style, c'est l'homme, a fact, however, scarcely calculated to lessen the objection with certain critics. Is it indeed true that I was so near to the pleasure and honor of making your acquaintance? And can it be true that you look back upon the lost opportunity with any regret? But, you know, if you had entered the crypt, you might have caught cold, or been tired to death, and wished yourself 1,000 miles off, which would have been worse than travelling them. It is not my interest, however, to put such thoughts in your head about its being all for the best, and I would rather hope, as I do, that what I lost by one chance I may recover by some future one. Winters shut me up, as they do the dormouse's eyes. In the spring we shall see. And I am so much better that I seem turning round to the outward world again. And in the meantime I have learnt to know your voice, not merely from the poetry, but from the kindness in it. Mr. Kenyon often speaks of you, dear Mr. Kenyon, who must unspeakably, or only speakably with tears in my eyes, has been my friend and helper, and my book's friend and helper. Critic and sympathizer, true friend of all hours. You know him well enough, I think, to understand that I must be grateful to him. I am writing too much. And notwithstanding that I am writing too much, I will write of one thing more. I will say that I am your debtor, not only for this cordial letter, and for all the pleasure which came with it, but in other ways, and those the highest. And I will say that while I live to follow this divine art of poetry, in proportion to my love for it and my devotion to it, I must be a devout admirer and student of your works. This is in my heart to say to you, and I say it. And for the rest, I am proud to remain your obliged and faithful Elizabeth B. Barrett. Robert Browning to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, New Cross, Hatcham, Surrey, January 13th, 1845. Dear Miss Barrett, I just shall say, in as few words as I can, that you make me very happy, and that, now the beginning is over, I dare say I shall do better, because my poor praise, number one, was nearly as felicitously brought out as a certain tribute to no less a personage than Tasso, which I was amused with at Rome some weeks ago, in a neat penciling on the plaster wall by his tomb at Sant Onofrio. Alla cara memoria di, please fancy solemn interspaces and grave capital letters at the new lines, di Torquato Tasso, il dottore Bernardini offriva il seguente carme, o tu, and no more the good man it should seem, breaking down with the overload of love here, but my o tu was breathed out most sincerely, and now you have taken it in gracious part. The rest will come after. Only, and which is why I write now, it looks as if I have introduced some phrase or other about your faults, so cleverly as to give exactly the opposite meaning to what I meant, which was that in my first ardor I had thought to tell you of everything which impressed me in your verses, down even to whatever faults I could find. A good earnest when I had got to them, that I had left out not much between, as if some Mr. Fellows were to say, in the overflow of his thirst enthusiasm of rewarded adventure, I will describe you all the outer life and the ways of these Lycians, down to their very sandal thongs, whereto the be corresponded one rejoins, shall I get on next week, then, your dissertation on sandal thongs? Yes, and a little about the Olympian horses and god charioteers as well. What struck me as faults were not matters on the removal of which one was to have poetry or high poetry, but the very highest poetry, so I thought, and that to any universal recognition. For myself, or any artist, in many of the cases there would be a positive loss of time, peculiar artist's pleasure, for an instructed eye loves to see where the brush has dipped twice in lustrous color, has lain insistingly along a favorite outline, dwelt lovingly in a grand shadow. For these too muches for the everybody's picture are so many helps to the making out the real painter's picture, as he had it in his brain. And all of the Titian's Naples Maudlin must have once been golden in its degree to justify that heap of hair in her hands, the only gold affected now. But about this soon, for night is drawing on, and I go out, yet cannot quiet a conscience till I report to myself, for I never said it to you, I think, that your poetry must be, cannot but be, infinitely more to me than mine to you. For you do what I always wanted, hoped to do, and only seem now likely to do for the first time. You speak out, you! I only make men and women speak, give you truth broken in prismatic hues, and fear the pure white light, even if it is in me, but I am going to try. So it will be no small comfort to have your company just now, seeing that when you have your men and women aforesaid, you are busied with them, whereas it seems bleak, melancholy work, this talking to the wind, for I have begun. Yet I don't think I shall let you hear, after all, the savage things about popes and imaginative religions that I must say. See how I go on and on to you, I, who, whenever now and then pulled by the head and hair into letter writing, get sorrowfully on for a line or two, as the cognate creature urged on by the stick and string, and then come down to flop upon the sweet haven of page 1, line last, as serene as the sleep of the virtuous. You will never more, I hope, talk of the honor of my acquaintance, but I will joyfully wait for the delight of your friendship, and the spring, and my chapel site after all. Ever yours, most faithfully, Robert Browning. For Mr. Kenyon, I have a convenient theory about him, and his otherwise quite unaccountable kindness to me, but 'tis quite night now, and they call me. What the hell? These two are so silly. I love them. Elizabeth Barrett Browning to Robert Browning. Dear Mr. Browning, the fault was clearly with me and not with you. When I had an Italian master years ago, he told me there was an unpronounceable English word which absolutely expressed me, and which he would say in his own tongue as he could not in mine, testa lunga. Of course, the signor meant headlong, and now I have had enough time to tame me, and might be expected to stand still in my stall. But you see I do not. Headlong I was at first, and headlong I continue, precipitously rushing forward through all manner of nettles and briars instead of keeping the path, guessing at the meaning of unknown words instead of looking into the dictionary, tearing open letters and never untying a string, and expecting everything to be done in a minute, and the thunder to be as quick as the lightning. And so, at your half word, I flew at the whole one, with all its possible consequences, and wrote what you read. Our common friend, as I think he is, Mr. Horne, is often forced to entreat me into patience and coolness of purpose, though his only intercourse with me has been by letter. And by the way, you will be sorry to hear that during his stay in Germany he has been headlong, out of a metaphor, twice. Once in falling from the Drachenfels, when he only just saved himself by catching at a vine, and once quite lately at Christmas in a fall on the ice of the Elbe in skating, when he dislocated his left shoulder in a very painful manner. He is doing quite well, I believe, but it was sad to have such a shadow from the German Christmas tree, and he a stranger. In art, however, I understand that it does not do to be headlong, but patient and laborious, and there is a love strong enough even in me to overcome nature. I apprehend what you mean in the criticism you just intimate, and I shall turn it over and over in my mind until I get practical good from it. What no mere critic sees, but what you, an artist, know, is the difference between the thing desired and the thing attained, between the idea in the writer's mind and the eidolon cast off in his work. All the effort, the quickening of the breath and beating of the heart in pursuit, which is ruffling and injurious to the general effect of a composition, all which you call insistency, and which many would call superfluity, and which is superfluous in a sense, you can pardon because you understand. The great chasm between the thing I say and the thing I would say would be quite dispiriting to me, in spite of even such kindness as yours, if the desire did not master the despondency. Oh, for a horse with wings! It is wrong of me to write so of myself, only you put your finger on the root of a fault which has, to my fancy, been a little misapprehended. I do not say everything I think, as has been said of me by master critics, but I take every means to say what I think, which is different, or I fancy so. In one thing, however, you are wrong. Why should you deny the full measure of my delight and benefit from your writings? I could tell you why you should not. You have in your vision two worlds, or, to use the language of the schools of the day, you are both subjective and objective in the habits of your mind. You can deal both with abstract thought and with human passion in the most passionate sense. Thus, you have an immense grasp in art, and no one at all accustomed to consider the usual forms of it could help regarding with reverence and gladness the gradual expansion of your powers. Then you are masculine to the height, and I, as a woman, have studied some of your gestures of language and intonation wistfully, as a thing beyond me far, and the more admirable for being beyond. Of your new work I hear with delight. How good of you to tell me! And it is not dramatic in the strict sense, I am to understand. Am I right in understanding so? And you speak in your own person to the winds? No, but to the 1,000 living sympathies which will awake to hear you. A great dramatic power may develop itself otherwise than in the formal drama, and I have been guilty of wishing before this hour, for reasons which I will not thrust upon you for all my tedious writing, that you would give the public a poem unassociated directly or indirectly with the stage, for a trial on the popular heart. I reverence the drama, but but I break in on myself out of consideration for you. I might have done it, you will think, before. I vex your serene sleep of the virtuous like a nightmare. Do not say no. I am sure I do. As to the vain parlance of the world, I did not talk of the honor of your acquaintance without a true sense of honor, indeed. But I shall willingly exchange it all, and now, if you please, at this moment, for fear of worldly mutabilities, for the delight of your friendship. Believe me, therefore, dear Mr. Browning, faithfully yours and gratefully, Elizabeth B. Barrett. For Mr. Kenyon's kindness, as I see it, no theory will account. I class it with mesmerism for that reason. Robert Browning to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. New Cross, Hatcham, Monday night. Postmarked January 28th, 1845. Dear Miss Barrett, your books lie on my table here, at an arm's length from me, in this old room where I sit all day. And when my head aches, or wanders, or strikes work, as it now or then will, I take my chance for either green-covered volume, as if it were so much fresh trefoil to feel in one's hands this winter-time. And round I turn, and putting a decisive elbow or 3 or 4 half done with bells of mine, read, and just as I have shut up the book and walked to the window, I recollect that you wanted me to find faults there, and that in an unwise hour I engaged to do so. Meantime, the days go by. The white-throat is come and sings now, and as I would not have you look down on me from your white heights, as promise-breaker, evader, or forgetter, if I could help, and as, if I am very candid and contrite, you may find it in your heart to write me again, who knows? I shall say at once that the said faults cannot be lost, must be somewhere, and shall be faithfully brought you back whenever they turn up, as people tell of one missing matters. I am rather exacting myself with my own gentle audience, and get to say spiteful things about them when they are backward in their dues of appreciation. But really, could I be sure that anybody as good as, I must go on, I suppose, and say, as myself, even were honestly to feel towards me as I do towards the writer of Bertha, and the drama, and the Duchess, and the Page, and the whole 2 volumes, I should be paid after a fashion, I know. One thing I can do, pencil, if you like, and annotate, and dissertate upon that I love most and least. I think I can do that, that is. Here, an odd memory comes of a friend who, volunteering such a service to a sonnet-writing somebody, gave him a taste of his quality in a side column of short criticisms on Sonnet the First, and starting off the beginning 3 lines with, of course, bad, worse, worst, made by a generous mintage of words to meet the sudden run of his epithets, worser, worserer, worserest, pays off the second tercet in full. No badder, badderer, badderest fell to the second's allowance, and worser, etc., answered the demands of the third. Worster, worsterer, worsterest supplied the emergency of the fourth, and bestowing his last worsteristest and worsteristest on lines 13 and 14, my friend, slapping his head like an emptied strong-box, frankly declared himself bankrupt, and honorably incompetent to satisfy the reasonable expectations of the rest of the series. What an illustration of the law by which opposite ideas suggest opposite, and contrary images come together. See now how, of that friendship you offer me, and here Juliet's word rises to my lips, I feel sure once and forever, I have got already, I see, into this little pet handwriting of mine, not anyone else's, which scratches on as if theatrical copyists, me, and Bradbury and Evans' reader were not. But you shall get something better than this nonsense one day, if you will have patience with me. Hardly better, though, because this does me real good, gives real relief to write. After all, you know nothing, next to nothing of me, and that stops me. Spring is to come, however. If you hate writing to me, as I hate writing to nearly everybody, I pray you never write. If you do, as you say, care for anything I have done, I will simply assure you that meaning to begin work in dear interest, begin without affection, God knows, I do not know what will help me more than hearing from you. And therefore, if you do not so very much hate it, I know I shall hear from you, and very little more about your tiring me. Ever yours faithfully, Robert Browning. Elizabeth Barrett Browning to Robert Browning. 50 Walpole Street. So an original should be Wimpole Street. February 3rd, 1845. Why, how could I hate to write to you, dear Mr. Browning? Could you believe in such a thing? If nobody likes writing to everybody, except such professional letter writers as you and I are not, yet everybody likes writing to somebody, and it would be strange and contradictory if I were not always delighted both to hear from you and to write to you. This talking upon paper being as good as a social pleasure as another, when our means are somewhat straitened. As for me, I have done most of my talking by post of late years, as people shut up in dungeons take up with scrawling mottos on the walls. Not that I write to many in the way of regular correspondence, as our friend Mr. Horne predicates of me in his romances, which is mere romancing, but that there are a few who will write and be written by me without a sense of injury. Dear Miss Mitford, for instance. You do not know her, I think, personally, although she was the first to tell me, when I was very ill and insensible to all the glories of the world except poetry, of the grand scene in Pippa Passes. She has filled a large drawer of this room with delightful letters, heart-warm and soul-warm, driftings of nature, if sunshine could drift like snow, and which, if they should ever fall the way of all writing into print, would assume the folio shape as a matter of course, and take rank on the lowest shelf of libraries, with Benedictine editions of the Fathers. I write this to you to show you how I can have pleasure in letters. I never think them too long, nor too frequent, nor too intelligible from being written in little pet hands. I can read any MS, except the writing on the pyramids, and if you will only promise to treat me en bon camarade, without reference to the conventionalities of ladies and gentlemen, taking no thought for your sentences, nor for mine, nor for your blots, nor for mine, nor for your blunt speaking, nor for mine, nor for your bad spelling, nor for mine, and if you will agree to send me a blotted thought whenever you are in the mind for it, and with as little ceremony and less legibility than you would think it necessary to employ towards your printer, why then I am ready to sign and seal the contract, and rejoice in being articled as your correspondent. Only don't let us have any constraint, any ceremony. Don't be civil to me when you feel rude, nor loquacious when you incline to silence, nor yielding in the manners when you are perverse in the mind. See how out of the world I am. Suffer me to profit by it in almost the only profitable circumstance, and let us rest from the bowing and curtsying, you and I, on each side. You will find me an honest man on the whole, if rather hasty and prejudging, which is a different thing from prejudice at the worst. And we have great sympathies in common, and I am inclined to look up to you in many things, and to learn as much of everything as you will teach me. On the other hand, you must prepare yourself to forbear and forgive. Will you? While I throw off the ceremony, I hold faster to the kindness. Is it true, as you say, that I know so little of you? And is it true, as others say, that the productions of an artist do not partake of his real nature, that in the minor sense man is not made in the image of God? It is not true, to my mind, and therefore it is not true that I know little of you, except in as far as it is true, which I believe, that your greatest works are to come. Need I assure you that I shall always hear with the deepest interest every word you will say to me of what you are doing or about to do? I hear of the old room and the bells lying about, with an interest which you may guess at, perhaps. And when you tell me besides of my poems being there, and of your caring for them so much beyond the tide mark of my hopes, the pleasure rounds itself into a charm, and prevents its own expression. Overjoyed I am with this cordial sympathy, but it is better, I feel, to try to justify it by future work than to thank you for it now. I think, if I may dare to name myself with you in the poetic relation, that we both have high views of the art we follow, and steadfast purpose in the pursuit of it, and that we should not, either of us, be likely to be thrown from the course by the casting of any Atalanta ball of speedy popularity. But I do not know, I cannot guess, whether you are liable to be pained deeply by hard criticism and cold neglect, such as original writers like yourself are too often exposed to, or whether the love of art is enough for you, and the exercise of art the filling joy of your life. Not that praise must not always of necessity be delightful to the artist, but that it may be redundant to his content. Do you think so, or not? It appears to me that poets who, like Keats, are highly susceptible to criticism must be jealous in their own persons of the future honor of their works. Because if a work is worthy, honor must follow it, though the worker should not live to see that following overtaking. Now, is it not enough that the work be honored? Enough, I mean, for the worker. And is it not enough to keep down a poet's ordinary wearing anxieties to think that if his work be worthy, it will have honor, and if not, that Sparta must have nobler sons than he? I am writing nothing applicable, I see, to anything in question, but when one falls into a favorite train of thought, one indulges oneself in thinking on. I began in thinking and wondering what sort of artistic constitution you had, being determined, as you may observe, with a sarcastic smile at the impertinence, to set about knowing you as much as possible of you immediately. Then you spoke of your gentle audience. You began, and I, who know that you have not one but many enthusiastic admirers, the fit and the few in intense meaning, yet not the diffused fame which will come to you presently, wrote on, down to the margin of the subject, till I parted from it altogether. But, after all, we are on the proper matter of sympathy. And after all that has been said and mused upon the natural ills, the anxiety, and the wearing out experienced by the true artist, is not the good immeasurably greater than the evil? Is not the great good and great joy? For my part, I wonder sometimes, I surprise myself wondering, how, without such an object and purpose of life, people find it worthwhile to live at all. And for happiness, why, my only idea of happiness, as far as my personal enjoyment is concerned, but I have been straitened in some respects, and in comparison with the majority of livers, lies deep in poetry and its associations. And then, the escape from the pangs of heart and bodily weakness, when you throw off yourself, what you feel to be yourself, into another atmosphere and into other relations where your life may spread its wings out new and gather on every separate plume a brightness from the sun of the sun. Is it possible that imaginative writers should be so fond of deprecating and lamenting over their own destiny? Possibly, certainly, but reasonable, not at all, and grateful less than anything. My faults? Shall I help you? You see them too well, I fear, and you know that I also have something of your feelings about being about to begin, or I should dare to praise you for having it. But in you it is different. It is in you a virtue. When Prometheus had recounted a long list of sorrows to be endured by Io, and declared at last that he was Medipo en Primoius, poor Io burst out crying, and when the author of Paracelsus and the Bells and Pomegranate says that he is only going to begin, we may well, to take the opposite idea as you write, rejoice and clap our hands. Yet I believe that whatever you may have done, you will do what is greater. It is my faith for you. And how I should like to know what poets have been your sponsors to promise and vow for you, and whether you have held true to early tastes or leapt violently from them, and what books you read, and what hours you write in. How curious I could prove myself, if it isn't proved already. But this is too much indeed, past all bearing, I suspect. Well, but if I ever write to you again, I mean if you wish it, it may be done in the other extreme of shortness. So do not take me for a born heroine of Richardson, or think that I sin always to this length, else you might indeed repent your quotation from Juliet, which I guessed at once, and of course, I have no joy in this contract today. It is too unadvised, too rash and sudden. Ever faithfully yours, Elizabeth B. Barrett. Robert Browning to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Hatcham, Tuesday. Postmark February 11th, 1845. Dear Miss Barrett, people would hardly ever tell falsehoods about a matter if they had been let tell truth in the beginning, for it is very hard to profane one's very self, and nobody who has, for instance, used certain words and ways to a mother or father, could, even if by the devil's help he would, reproduce or mimic them with any effect to anybody that was to be won over. And so, if I love you were always spoken, when it might be, there would, I suppose, be no fear of its desecration at any time after time. But lo! Only last night I had to write, on the part of Mr. Carlyle, to a certain ungainly, foolish gentleman who keeps back from him, with all the fussy impotence of stupidity, not bad feeling, alas, for that we could deal with, a certain MS letter of Cromwell's, which completes the collection, now going to press. And this long ears had to be dear sir'd and obedient servanted, till I said, to use a mild word, commend me to the sincerities of this kind of thing. When I spoke of you knowing little of me, one of the senses in which I meant so was this, that I would not well vowel point my commonplace letters and syllables with a masoretic other sound and sense, make my dear something intenser than dears, in ordinary, and yours ever a thought more significant than the run of its like. And all this came of your talking of tiring me, being too envious, etc., etc., which I should never have heard of had the plain truth looked out of my letters with its unmistakable eyes. Now, what you say of the bowing, and the convention that is to be, and the tant de façons that are not to be, helps me once and forever. For have I not a right to say simply that, for reasons I know, for reasons I don't exactly know, but might if I chose to think a little, and for still other reasons which most likely all the choosing and thinking in the world which would not make me know, I had rather hear from you than see anybody else. Never you care, dear noble Carlyle, nor you, my own friend Alfred, over the sea, nor a troop of true lovers. Are not their fates written? There. Don't you answer this, please, but mind it is on record. And now then, with a lighter conscience, I shall begin replying to your questions. But then, what I have printed gives no knowledge of me. It evidences abilities of various kinds, if you will, and a dramatic sympathy with a certain modifications of passion. That, I think. But I never have begun even what I hope I was born to begin and end. Robert Browning, a poem. And next, if I speak, and God knows feel, as if what you have read were sadly imperfect demonstrations of even mere ability, it is from no absurd vanity, though it might seem so, that these scenes and song scraps are such mere and very escapes of my inner power, which lives in me like the light in those crazy Mediterranean fairs I have watched at sea, wherein the light is ever revolving in a dark gallery, bright and alive, and only after a weary interval leaps out, for a moment, from the one narrow chink,
and then goes on with the blind wall between it and you, and no doubt then precisely does the poor drudge that carries the cresset set himself most busily to trim the wick. For don't think I want to say I have not worked hard. This head of mine knows better. But the work has been inside, and not when at stated times I held up my light to you, and that there is no self-delusion here I would prove to you and nobody else, even by opening this desk I write on and showing what stuff in the way of wood I could make a great bonfire with, if I might only knock off the whole clumsy top of my tower. Of course, every writing body says the same, so I gain nothing by the avowal. But when I remember how I have done what was published, and half done what may never be, I say with some right, you can know but little of me. Still, I hope sometimes, though phrenologists will have it that I cannot, and I am doing better with this darling Luria so safe in my head, and a tiny slip of paper I cover with my thumb. Then you inquire about my sensitiveness to criticism, and I shall be glad to tell you exactly, because I have more than once taken a course you might not else understand. I shall live always, that is for me. I am living here this 1845, that is for London. I write from a thorough conviction that it is the duty of me, and with the belief that, after every drawback and shortcoming, I do my best, all things considered. That is for me. And so being, the not being listened to by one human creature would, I hope, in no wise affect me. But of course I must, if for merely scientific purposes, know all about this 1845, its ways and doings, and something I do know, as that for a dozen cabbages, if I pleased to grow them in the garden here, I might demand, say, 12 pence at Covent Garden Market, and for that dozen scenes of average goodness I may challenge as many plaudits at the theatre close by, and 12 pages of verse brought to the Rialto, where verse merchants do congregate, ought to bring me a fair proportion of the reviewer's gold currency, seeing the other traders pouch their winnings, as I do see. Well, when they won't pay me for my cabbages, nor praise me for my poems, I may, if I please, say, more's the shame, and bid both parties decamp the crows in Greek phrase, and yet go very light-hearted back to the garden full of rose-trees, and a soul full of comforts. If they had bought my greens, I should have been able to buy the last number of Punch, and go through the toll-gate of Waterloo Bridge, and give the blind clarionet player a trifle, and all without changing my gold. If they had taken to my books, my father and mother would have been proud of this, and the other favourable critique, and, at least so folks hold, I should have to pay Mr. Moxon less by a few pounds. Whereas, but you see, indeed I force myself to say ever and anon, in the interest of market gardeners regular and Keats's proper, it is nothing to you critics, hucksters, all of you, if I have this garden and this conscience. I might go die at Rome, or take to gin in the newspaper, for what you would care. So, I don't quite lay open my resources to everybody. But it does so happen that I have met with more than I could have expected in this manner of kindly and prompt recognition. I never wanted a real set of good hearty praisers, and no bad reviewers. I am quite content with my share. No, what I laughed at in my gentle audience is a sad trick the real admirers have of admiring the wrong place, enough to make an apostle swear. That does make me savage. Never the other kind of people. Why, think now, take your own drama of exile, and let me send it to the first 20 men and women that shall knock at your door today and after, of whom the first 5 are the postman, the seller of cheap sealing wax, Mr. Hawkins, Jr., the butcher for orders, and the tax-gatherer. Will you let me, by Cornelius Agrippa's assistance, force these 5 and these fellows to read and report on this drama? And when I have put these faithful reports into fair English, do you believe they would be better than, if as good, the general run of periodical criticisms? Not they, I will venture to affirm. But then, once and again, I get these people together and give them your book, and persuade them, moreover, that by praising it, the postman will be helping its author to divide Long Acre into 2 beats, one of which she will take with half the salary and all the red collar, that a sealing-wax vendor will see red wafers brought into vogue, and so on for the rest. And won't you just wish for your spectators and observers and Newcastle upon Tyne, hebdomadal Mercuries back again? You see the inference. I do sincerely esteem it a perfectly providential and miraculous thing that they are so well behaved in ordinary, these critics, and for Keats and Tennyson to go softly all their days, for a gruff word or two, is quite inexplicable to me, and always has been. Tennyson reads the Quarterly, and does as they bid him, with the most solemn face in the world. Out goes this, in goes that, all is changed and ranged. Oh, me! Out comes the sun, in comes the Times, and 11 strikes it does already. And I have to go to town, and I have no alternative, but that this story of the critic and the poet, the bear and the fiddle, should begin but break off in the middle. Yet I doubt, nor will you henceforth. I know I say I vex you, I am sure by this lengthy writing. Mind that spring is coming, for all this snow, and know me for yours ever faithfully, Robert Browning. I don't dare, yet I will, ask, can you read this? Because I could write a little better, but not so fast. Do you keep writing just as you do now. Elizabeth Barrett Browning to Robert Browning, 50 Wimpole Street, February 17th, 1845. Dear Mr. Browning, to begin with the end, which is only characteristic of the perverse like myself, I assure you I read your handwriting as currently as I could read the clearest type from font. If I had practiced the art of reading your letters all my life, I couldn't do it better. And then I approve of the small MS upon principle. Think what an immense quantity of physical energy must go into the making of those immense sweeping handwritings achieved by some persons. Mr. Lander, for instance, who writes as if he had the sky for a copybook, and dotted his I's in proportion. People who do such things should wear gauntlets, yes, and have none to wear, or they wouldn't waste their time so. People who write by profession, shall I say, never should do it, or what will become of them when most of their strength retires into their head and heart, as is the case with some of us, and may be the case with all. And when they have to write a poem 12 times over, as Mr. Kenyon says I should do if I were virtuous. Not that I do it. Does anybody do it, I wonder? Do you, ever? From what you tell me of the trimming of the light, I imagine not. And besides, one may be laborious as a writer without copying 12 times over. I believe there are people who will tell you in a moment what 3 times 6 is without doing it on their fingers, and in the same way one may work one's verses in one's head quite as laboriously as on paper. I maintain it. I consider myself a very patient, laborious writer, though dear Mr. Kenyon laughs me to scorn when I say so. And just see how it could be otherwise. If I were knitting a purse, I might be thinking of something else and drop my stitches. Or even if I were writing verses to please a popular taste, I might be careless in it. But the pursuit of an ideal acknowledged by the mind will draw and concentrate the powers of the mind. And art, you know, is a jealous god and demands the whole man or woman. I cannot conceive of a sincere artist who is also a careless one, though one may have a quicker hand than another in general, and though all are liable to vicissitudes in the degree of facility, and to entanglements in the machinery, notwithstanding every degree of facility. You may write 20 lines in one day, or even 3 like Euripides in 3 days, and 100 lines in one more day, and yet on the 100 may have been expended as much good work as on the 20 and the 3. And also, As you say, the lamp is trimmed behind the wall, and the act of utterance is the evidence of foregone study still more than it is the occasion to study. The deep interest with which I read all that you had the kindness to write to me of yourself, you must trust me for, as I find it hard to express it. It is sympathy in one way, and interest every way. And now see, although you proved to me with admirable logic that, for reasons which you know and reasons which you do not know, I couldn't possibly know anything about you, though that is all true and proven, which is better than true, I really did understand of you before I was told exactly what you told me. Yes, I did, indeed. I felt sure that as a poet you fronted the future, and that your own chief works, in your own apprehension, were to come. Oh, I take no credit of sagacity for it, as I did not long ago to my brothers and sisters when I professed to have knowledge of all their friends, whom I never saw in my life, by the image coming with the name, and threw them into shouts of laughter by giving out all the blue eyes and black eyes and hazel eyes and noses Roman and Gothic ticketed aright for the Smiths and Miss Hawkinsons, and hit the bull's-eye and the true features of the case 10 times out of 12. But you are different. You are to be made out by the comparative anatomy system. You have thrown out the fragments of O's, sublime, indicative of soul mammotheism, and you live to develop your nature, if you live. That is easy and plain. You have taken a great range from those high, faint notes of the mystics which are beyond personality, to dramatic impersonations, gruff with nature. Grr, you swine! And when these are thrown into harmony, as in a manner they are in Pippa Passes, which I could find in my heart to covet the authorship of more than any of your works, the combinations of effect must always be striking and noble, and you must feel yourself drawn on to such combinations more and more. But I do not, you say, know yourself, you. I only know the abilities and faculties. Well, then, teach me of yourself, you. I will not insist on the knowledge, and in fact you have not written the Robert Browning poem yet. Your rays fall obliquely rather than straight. I see you only in your moon. Do tell me all of yourself that you can and will, before the Robert Browning poem comes out. And what is Luria? A poem and not a drama. I mean, a poem not in the dramatic form. Well, I have wondered at you sometimes, not for daring, but for bearing to trust your noble works into the great mill of the rank popular playhouse, to be ground into pieces between the teeth of vulgar actors and actresses. I, for one, would as soon have my soul among lions. There is a fascination of it, says Miss Mitford, and I am sure there must be to account for it. Publics in the mass are bad enough, but to distill the dregs of the public, and baptize oneself in that acrid moisture, where can be the temptation? I could swear by Shakespeare, as was once sworn by those dead at Marathon, that I do not see where. I love the drama, too. I look to our old dramatists as to our kings and princes in poetry. I love them through all their deeps of their abominations. But the theatre in those days was a better medium between the people and the poet, and the press in those days was a less sufficient medium than now. Still, the poet suffered by the theatre even then. The reasons are very obvious. How true. How true is all you say about the critics. My convictions follow you in every word, and I delighted to read your views of the poet's right aspect towards criticism. I read them with the most complete appreciation and sympathy. I have sometimes thought it would be a curious and instructive process, as illustrative of the wisdom and apprehensiveness of the critics, if anyone would collect the critical soliloquies of every age touching its own literature, as far as such may be extant, and confer them with the literary product of the said ages. Professor Wilson has begun something of the kind, apparently, in his initiatory paper of the last Blackwood number on the critics, beginning with Dryden. But he seems to have no design in his notice. It is a mere critique on the critic. And then he should have begun earlier than Dryden, earlier even than Sir Philip Sidney, who, in the noble Discourse on Poetry, gives such singular evidence of being stone critic blind to the gods who moved around him. As far as I can remember, he saw even Shakespeare but indifferently. Oh, it was in his eyes quite an unillumined age, that period of Elizabeth which we see full of suns. And few can see what is close to their eyes, though they run their heads against it. The denial of contemporary genius is the rule rather than the exception. No one counts the eagles in the nest, till there is a rush of wings, and lo, they are flown. And here we speak of understanding men, such as the Sidneys and the Drydens, of the great body of critics you observe rightly, that they are better than might be expected of their badness. Only the fact of their influence is no less undeniable than why they should not be influential. The brazen kettles will be taken for oracles all the world over, but the influence is for today, for this hour, not for tomorrow and the day after, unless, indeed, as you say, the poet do himself perpetuate the influence by submitting to it. Do you know Tennyson? That is, with a face-to-face knowledge. I have great admiration for him. In execution he is exquisite, and in music a most subtle wearer out to the ear of fine airs. That a poet should submit blindly to the suggestions of his critic. I do not say that the suggestions from without may not be accepted with discrimination sometimes, to the benefit of the acceptor, blindly and implicitly, to the suggestions of his critics, is as much as if Babbage were to take my opinion and undo his calculating machine by it. Napoleon called poetry science creuse, which, although he was not scientific in poetry himself, is quite true enough. But anybody is qualified, according to everybody, for giving opinions upon poetry. It is not so in chemistry and mathematics, nor is it true, I believe, in whist and the polka. But then these are more serious things. Yes, and it does delight me to hear of your garden full of roses, and soul full of comforts. You have the right to both. You have the key to both. You have written enough to live by, though only beginning to write, as you say of yourself. And this reminds me to remind you that when I talked of coveting most the authorship of your Pippa, I did not mean to call it your finest work. You might reproach me for that, but just to express a personal feeling. Do you know what it is to covet your neighbor's poetry? Not his fame, but his poetry. I dare say not. You are too generous. And in fact beauty is beauty, whether it comes by your own hand or another's. Blessed be the coming of it. I, besides, feel that. And yet, I have been aware of a feeling within me which has spoken 2 or 3 times to the effect of a wish that I had been visited with the vision of Pippa before you. And confiteor TV, I confess the baseness of it. The conception is, to my mind, most exquisite and altogether original, and the contrast in the working out of the plan singularly expressive of various faculty. Is the poem under your thumb emerging from it? And in what meter? May I ask such questions? And does Mr. Carlyle tell you that he has forbidden all singing to this perverse and froward generation, which should work and not sing? And have you told Mr. Carlyle that song is work, and also the condition of work? I am a devout sitter at his feet, and it is an effort to me to think of him wrong in anything. And once, when he told me to write prose and not verse, I fancied that his opinion was I had mistaken my calling, a fancy which, in infinite kindness and gentleness, he stooped immediately to correct. I never shall forget the grace of that kindness, but then, for him to have thought ill of me would not have been strange, as I often think ill of myself, as God knows. But for Carlyle to think of putting away, even for a season, the poetry of the world was wonderful, and has left me ruffled in my thoughts ever since. I do not know him personally at all, but as his disciple I ventured, by an exceptional motive, to send him my poems, and I heard from him as a consequence. Dear and noble he is indeed, and as a poet unaware of himself, all but the sense of music. You feel it so, do you not? And the dear sir has let him have the letter of Cromwell, I hope, and satisfied the obedient servant. The curious thing in this world is not the stupidity, but the upper handism of the stupidity. The geese are in the capital, and the Romans in the farmyard, and it seems all quite natural that it should be so, both to geese and Romans. But there are things you say which seem to me supernatural, for reasons which I know, and for reasons which I don't know. You will let me be grateful to you, will you not? You must, if you will or not. And also, I would not wait for more leave, if I could but see your desk, as I do your death's heads and the spider webs appertaining. But the soul of Cornelius Agrippa fades from me. Ever faithfully yours, Elizabeth B. Barrett. Robert Browning to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Wednesday morning, spring. Postmarked February 26th, 1845. Real, warm spring, my dear Miss Barrett, and the birds know it. And in spring I shall see you, surely see you. For when did I once fail to get whatever I had set my heart upon? As I ask myself sometimes, with a strange fear. I took up this paper to write a great deal. Now I don't think I shall write much. I shall see you, I say. That Luria you inquire about shall be my last play, for it is but a play, woe's me. I have one done here, a soul's tragedy, as it is properly enough called, but that would not do to end with, and I will. And Luria is a Moor of Othello's country, and devotes himself to something he thinks Florence, and the old fortune follows. All in my brain yet, but the bright weather helps, and I will soon loosen my Braccio and Puccio, a pale discontented man, and Tiburtio the paisan, a good true fellow this one, and Domitia the lady. Loosen all these upon the dear foolish, ravishing must his folly be, golden-hearted Luria. All of these with their worldly wisdom and Tuscan shrewd ways, and for me the misfortune is, I sympathize just as much with these as with him. So there can be no good come of keeping this wild company any longer. And Luria, and the other sadder ruin of one Chiappino, these got rid of. I will do as you bid me, and say first I have some romances and lyrics all dramatic to dispatch, and then I shall stoop of a sudden under and out of this dancing ring of men and women, hand in hand, and stand still a while, should my eyes dazzle. And when that's over, they will be gone, and you will be there, pas vrai? For, as I think I told you, I always shiver involuntarily when I look, no, glance, at this first poem of mine to be. Now, I call it, what upon my soul for a solemn matter it is, what is to be done now, believed now, so far as it has been revealed to me. Solemn words truly, and to find myself writing them to anyone else. Enough now. I know Tennyson face to face, no more than that. I know Carlyle, and love him, know him so well that I would have told you he had shaken that grand head of his at singing, so thoroughly does he love and live by it. When I last saw him, a fortnight ago, he turned from I don't know what other talk quite abruptly on me with, "Did you never try to write a song? Of all things in the world, that I should be proudest to do." Then came his definition of a song. Then, with an appealing look to Mrs. C., I always say that some day, in spite of nature and my stars, I shall burst into a song. He is not mechanically musical, he meant, and the music is the poetry he holds, and should enwrap the thoughts, as Donne says, an amber drop enwraps a bee. And then he began to recite an old Scotch song, stopping at the first rude couplet. The beginning words are merely to set the tune, they tell me, and then again the couplet about, or to the effect that, give me, but in broad Scotch, give me but my lass, I care not for my cogie. He says, quoth Carlyle magisterially, that if you allow him the love of his lass, you may take away all else, even his cogie, his cup, or his can, and he cares not. Just as the professor expounds Lycophron. And just before I left England 6 months ago, did I not hear him croon, if not certainly sing, Charlie is my darling, with an adoring emphasis. And then he stood back, as it were, from the song to look at it better, and said, how must that notion of ideal wondrous perfection have impressed itself in this old Jacobite's young cavalier? They go to save their land, and the young cavalier, when I, who care nothing about such a rag of a man, cannot but feel as he felt in speaking his words after him. After saying which, he would be sure to counsel everybody to get their heads clear of all singing. Do not let me forget to clap hands. We got the letters dearly bought, as it was by the dear sirs, etc., and insignificant scrap as it proved, but still it is got, to my encouragement in diplomacy. Who told you of my skulls and spider-webs? Horn? Last year I petted an extraordinarily fine fellow, a garden spider. There was a singularity, and the thin, clever even for a spider's sort. And they are so spirited and sly, all of them. This kind makes a long cone of a web, with a square chamber of vantage at the end, and there he sits, loosely, and looks about. A great fellow that housed himself with real gusto in the jaws of a great skull, whence he watched me as I wrote, and I remember speaking to Horn about his good points. Phrenologists look gravely at that great skull, by the way, and hope in their grim manner that its owner made out a good end. He looks quietly now, out at the green little hill behind. I have no insight into the feelings of furniture, and treat books and prints with a reasonable consideration. How some people use their pictures, for instance, is a mystery to me, very revolting, all the same. Portraits obliged to face each other forever, prints put together in portfolios. My Polidoro's perfect Andromeda, along with Boars of Carousing by Ostade, where I found her, my own father's doing, or I would say more. And when I have said I like Pippa better than anything else I have done yet, I shall have answered all you bade me. And now may I begin questioning? No, for it is all a pure delight to me, so that you do but right. I never was without good, kind, generous friends and lovers, so they say, so they were and are. Perhaps they came at the wrong time. I never wanted them, though that makes no difference in my gratitude, I trust. But I know myself, surely, and always have done so. For is there not somewhere a little book I first printed when a boy, with John Mill, the metaphysical head, his marginal note that the writer possessed a deeper self-consciousness than I ever knew in a sane human being? So I never deceived myself much, nor called my feelings for people other than they were. And who has a right to say, if I have not, that I had, but I said that supernatural or no? Pray tell me, too, of your present doings and projects. And never write yourself grateful to me, who am grateful, very grateful to you. For none of your words, but I take in earnest. And tell me, if spring be not coming, come, and I will take to writing the gravest of letters, because this beginning is for gladness' sake, like Carlyle's song couplet. My head aches a little today, and as poor dear Kirke White said to the moon, from his heap of mathematical papers, I throw aside the learned sheet, I cannot choose but gaze, she looks so mildly sweet. Out on the foolish phrase, but there's hard rhyming without it. Ever yours faithfully, Robert Browning. Elizabeth Barrett Browning to Robert Browning, 50 Wimpole Street, February 27th, 1845. Yes, but dear Mr. Browning, I want the spring according to the new style, mine, and not the old one of you and the rest of the poets. To me, unhappily, the snowdrop is much the same as the snow. It feels cold underfoot, and I have grown skeptical about the voice of the turtle, as the east winds blow so loud. April is a Parthian with a dart, and May, at least the early part of it, a spy in the camp. That is my idea of what you call spring. Mine in the new style. A little later comes my spring, and indeed, after such severe weather from which I have just escaped with my life, I may thank it for coming at all. How happy you are to be able to listen to the birds without the commentary of the east wind, which, like other commentaries, spoils the music. And how happy I am when I listen to you, when you write such kind, open-hearted letters to me. I am delighted to hear all you say to me of yourself, and Luria, and the spider, and to do him no honor in the association of the great teacher of the age, Carlyle, who is also yours and mine. He fills the office of a poet, does he not, by analyzing humanity back to its elements, to the destruction of the conventions of the hour. That is, strictly speaking, the office of the poet, is it not? And he discharges it fully, and with a wider intelligibility, perhaps as far as the contemporary period is concerned, than if he did forthwith burst into a song. But how I do wander. I meant to say, and I will call myself back to say, that the spring will really come some day, I hope and believe, and the warm, settled weather with it, and that then I shall be probably fitter for certain pleasures than I can appear even to myself now. And in the meantime I seem to see Luria instead of you. I have visions and dream dreams, and the soul's tragedy, which sounds to me like the step of a ghost of an old drama. And you are not to think that I blaspheme the drama, dear Mr. Browning, or that I ever thought of exhorting you to give up the solemn robes and tread of the bearskin. It is the theatre which vulgarizes these things, the modern theatre, in which we see no altar, where the Timele is replaced by the caprice of the popular actor. And also, I have a fancy that your great dramatic power would work more clearly and audibly in the less definite mold. But you ride your own faculty as Oceanus did his seahorse, directing it by your will, and woe to the impertinence which would dare to say turn this way, or turn from that way. It should not be my impertinence. Do not think I blaspheme the drama. I have gone through all such reading as should never be read, that is, by women, through my love of it on the contrary. And the dramatic faculty is strong in you. And therefore, as I speak unto a wise man, judge what I say. For myself and my own doings, you shall hear directly what I have been doing, and what I am about to do. Some years ago, as perhaps you may have heard, but I hope not, for the fewer who hear of it the better. Some years ago, I translated, or rather undid into English, the Prometheus of Aeschylus. To speak of this production moderately, not modestly, it is the most miserable of all miserable versions of the class. It was completed, in the first place, in 13 days, the iambics thrown into blank verse, the lyrics into rhymed octosyllabics, and the like, and the whole together as cold as Caucasus, and as flat as the nearest plain. To account for this, the haste may be something, but if my mind had been properly awakened at the time, I might have made still more haste and done it better. Well, the comfort is that the little book was most unadvertised and unknown, and that most of the copies, through my entreaty of my father, are shut up in the wardrobe of his bedroom. If I ever get well, I shall show my joy by making a bonfire of them. In the meantime, my recollection of this sin of mine has been my nightmare and daymare too, and the sin has been the blot on my escutcheon. I could look in nobody's face with a "thou canst not say I did it." I know, I did it. And so I resolved to wash away the transgression and translate the tragedy over again. It was an honest, straightforward proof of repentance, was it not? And I have completed it, except the transcription and last polishing. If Aeschylus stands at the foot of my bed now, I shall have little breath to front him. I have done my duty by him, not indeed according to his claims, but in proportion to my faculty. Whether I shall ever publish or not, remember, remains to be considered. That is a different side of the subject. If I do, it may be in a magazine, but this is in another ground. And then I have in my head to associate with the version a monodrama of my own, not a long poem, but a monologue of Aeschylus as he sat in blind exile on the flats of Sicily and recounted the past to his own soul just before the eagle cracked his great massy skull with a stone. But my chief intention just now is the writing of a sort of novel poem, a poem as completely modern as Geraldine's courtship, running into the midst of our conventions, and rushing into drawing rooms and the like, where angels fear to tread, and so meeting face to face and without mask the humanity of the age, and speaking the truth as I conceive of it, out plainly. That is my intention. It is not mature enough yet to be called a plan. I am waiting for a story, and I won't take one, because I want to make one, and I like to make my own stories, because then I can take liberties with them in the treatment. Who told me of your skulls and spiders? Why, couldn't I know it without being told? Did Cornelius Agrippa know nothing without being told? Mr. Horn never spoke it to my ears. I never saw him face to face in my life, although we have corresponded for long, and he never wrote it to my eyes. Perhaps he does not know that I know it. Well then, if I were to say I heard it from you yourself, how would you answer? And it was so. Why, are you not aware that these are the days of mesmerism and clairvoyance? Are you an infidel? I have believed in your skulls for the last year, for my part. And I have some sympathy in your habit of feeling for chairs and tables. I remember when I was a child and wrote poems in little clasped books, I used to kiss the books and put them away tenderly, because I had been happy near them, and take them out by turns when I was going from home, to cheer them by the change of air and the pleasure of the new place. This, not for the sake of the verses written in them, and not for the sake of the writing more verses in them, but from pure gratitude. Other books I used to treat in a like manner, and talk to the trees and the flowers was a natural inclination. But between me and that time, the cypresses grow thick and dark. Is it true that your wishes fulfill themselves? And when they do, are they not bitter to your taste? Do you not wish them unfulfilled? Oh, this life, this life! There is comfort in it, they say, and I almost believe. But the brightest place in the house is leaning out of the window, at least for me. Of course you are self-conscious. How could you be a poet otherwise? Tell me. Ever faithfully yours, EBB. And was the little book written with Mr. Mill, pure metaphysics, or what? Alright, well, that's where I'm going to end things. So, I hope you had a nice Valentine's Day, and I hope that this at least was a nice distraction, if nothing else. Starting next week, we'll be going back to Frankenstein. We're about halfway through the book, so things are starting to get pretty good. I'm very excited about it.